learning detachment to material things at such an early age. And I feel after that also learning detachment from people, that you cherish those friendships, you cherish those experiences while you're physically with people, in that moment, but also that our lives are not defined by constantly being with the same people.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode. I am very excited to have my friend Mona Kashani Hearn. I knew her as Mona Kashani. Now she's Mona Hearn. But back in the day, we met in our college years, and I actually also know her husband because we were all college. We were all living in LA during our college years. So I'm really excited to have her on. And Mona is a busy mom of two, teaches at the university level. And right now, I'm sure she's wearing all those hats, as many of us are during this time of being home. So I am so grateful that, Mona, that you took the time to be on our episode today. So welcome, my dear.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited that you're on. And one of the things too, aside from all those titles, I like to say that Mona is one of the most radiant souls I've met in my life. And I can say that completely honestly, just always with a smile on her face, just gleaming, and her eyes always shine. So that is something, if for you guys that are just listening to her voice, just imagine just a radiant smile and shimmering eyes, because that's her soul speaking through. So just wanted to just throw that out there for everybody else. So Mona, thank you again, honey, for taking the time to talk today. And we are going to jump right in to sharing a little bit about why it is I have you on this podcast to share your journey and all the beautiful, grateful moments that have come from the experiences you've had and how you've been able to then give back from those experiences to others. So, let's start a little bit with your upbringing. So, you were born in Iran, correct? Let's start there.
Yeah. So I was born in a Baha'i family in Iran, and as many people know, Baha'is are persecuted in Iran. And till about the age of 8, I had this really perfect childhood. And the revolution in Iran happened, and I saw a lot of people struggling, and a lot of people, especially Baha'is, losing their jobs and their retirement. And you always heard stories of Baha'is being arrested. However, my parents, like all parents around the world, always tried to create a very loving and peaceful environment at home for us. So, although I knew that the Baha'is, as a Baha'i, that Baha'is in Iran were being persecuted as a child, it hadn't yet impacted my family. And one day we went to visit my father's uncle in the city of Tehran, which is the capital city. And my dad just said, I'm just going to go quickly to work. And he worked in Tehran, and he went and he never came back. And we waited for him. And my mother, went to his place of business looking for him. And she found out that he was arrested because he was a Baha'i by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. However, for a very long period of times, for several of months, we didn't know if he was alive or where he was, because we would go to different prisons and they just wouldn't give us any answers. So
Mhm.
that was a really difficult time, those first couple of months, not knowing where he was. And then finally, I believe it was after 7 months or so, we finally found out that he was being held in the notorious Evin prison. And after 10 months, they finally gave us visitations, where they would allow us once a month for 10 minutes to go to the Evin prison to visit him. So, uh,
Once a month, 10 minutes. So after 10 months of not knowing where your father was, 10 months later, you finally are able to start visiting and you only would get 10 minutes once a month to see him.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because someone can look at it and say, "Gosh, 10 minutes is so little, right?"
Mhm.
And we would go, and we lived in a town about an hour from Tehran, so we would have to take the bus and take another bus because the prison is kind of out of town. It's not easily accessible. And we would go, and there were many Baha'is there, and we would, gosh, stand in line. Just as a child, it seemed to me forever, like maybe for half a day, and they would have the Baha'is stand there forever. And then, you would finally go in. And as a 9-year old by this time, it was just kind of scary because, you have the 10 minutes, but you enter the visitation room and they have all the prisoners lined up behind, glass windows, and there is a phone, and there is soldiers standing there with guns. And 10 minutes seems so short, but also as a kid, and as everybody was a little bit like paranoid of like what to say, you're scared of saying the wrong thing. So
Mhm.
it was both short and long to some extent, because it's like you can't really freely talk, or you can I couldn't go around and give my dad a hug. So it would be always a 1 day event of like trying to go to visit him. But at the same time, I had created this little calendar for myself of marking the days off, and it was just like the most glorious occasion of getting ready and having the opportunity to go and visit him in prison.
This is an experience of a 9-year-old, and this went on for how long?
So this is what we did, like on again, as I said, once a month we could go and visit my dad. And then one day, I remember it was January, and in the city of Tehran, gosh, winters are really cold. There's just snow everywhere. And I just remember it was like a January day, and it was super cold. And we went for a visit. So again, same thing. We had to take, the bus and get there and stand in line in the snow for hours and hours. And finally, but we were excited. All these people, we are all standing in line outside. And my mom had the visitation card, and we went. It was our turn, so she gave this visitation card to this soldier, and he kind of looked at it, and you could see he was surprised, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And my mom said, "Oh, we're here to, to visit my husband." And he just I just never forget it. He just started laughing, and he said, "Gosh, I can't believe no one told you, but your husband, yeah, we killed him a month ago." And that's how we found out that my dad, along with a number of other Baha'is, had previously been had been killed just because he was a member of the Baha'i faith, just because he has a different religion. And in those circumstances, we basically found out that he was killed. And then someone went to the back, and they gave us like a little bag with some of his clothes. And I remember his shoes were in there. And and they gave us like an address, and they said, go, he's buried where all the Baha'is that we have killed are buried,
Oh
basically. So
gosh.
that's how we found out, that um, he had been killed. And then it just that was the moment after. So he was altogether in prison for about 19 months. Um,
19 months, and so
yeah.
after 19 months and of you going and then again you get there, travel, excited, writing it in your little calendar to go and see your father, and you get there an hour and a half after bus rides to find out and to have this image stuck in your head of this guard's face and laughter at your family's visit to come and see your dad and to kind of tell you in your face that way and just hand you a bag of his things. I'm seeing that in my head and I can't even imagine like how that would impact, that memory. Um, Thank you for sharing that. That is a lot. So at that moment, and for the listeners, just make sure to find out a little bit more about this process. But yes, in the country of Iran, then and still now, several minority religions, quote it unquote, and you could explain it probably better than I can, um, Mona. But the Baha'is and other minority religions are not allowed to practice, basically. So this has been happening for decades, well, centuries really, but off and on through centuries, correct? So during the revolution was one of the highest peak times in Iranian life history, that a lot of these events, like your father and many other Baha'is at that time, were imprisoned and then also martyred or killed. But it's still going on, correct? It's still happening.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
think persecution takes different forms, and when I lived in Iran, nearly every Baha'i that I knew was experiencing some form of persecution. In my
Mhm.
case, my father was imprisoned and then eventually killed. In other people's cases, they would lose their job or they would lose their retirement or they couldn't go to the university.
Exactly.
So it's just so everybody that I knew, just because they're members of the Baha'i faith, they were experiencing difficulties and challenges in different formats.
Mhm. And so then at that time, then you're about 9, or at that point, was it around 9 still when you found out then that in that January that you found out that your father had died? How long after then did your family leave Iran?
Yeah, so for me, it was really interesting because, like, during this time, as I said, so my dad was in prison for about 19 months. And then his brother, who was my uncle, he was also arrested and put in prison. And he was in prison for 5 years. And then he was released. And then they arrested him again for being a Baha'i. And he was in prison for another 5 years. So, and despite all these challenges that were going on, the one place for me that I felt I could escape, and
Mhm.
a place that I could just like be myself, believe it or not, was going to
Mhm.
school, and
Mm.
I just loved going to school. And all I had to worry about was a silly, word problem or reading a
Mm.
story or writing an essay or drawing a picture. And I just loved being, in that setting, and I've always loved school, and I never forget it. So this is after we had found out that my father had passed away. I was in school, and I remember the principal walked in, and you could see she was just so sad and just really, her eyes were red. You could see, she had been crying. And this is also during the time that the Iran-Iraq war was going on.
Mm.
So you always heard, news of people, teachers, family members, or brothers, getting killed during the war. So we didn't know what was going on, but she was, obviously really sad. And she walked in and she said, "Who are the Baha'i kids in this class?" And a number of us raised our hands, and she just was so emotional. And she said, "I am so sorry, but I have a letter here from the Iranian government that says that if you're a Baha'i, you cannot come to school anymore. That Baha'i children were basically
Banned from studying.
denied
Banned.
access
Yeah,
to
denied.
education. Up to that point, it was just you can't go to the university, but at this point they're like, you can't even go to the elementary school. And to me, that was just, I remember, being
Heartbreaking.
taken into the principal's office, and there is all these people trying to convince you that your parents are part of the wrong faith and you need to change your religion. And if you do, you can stay at school. And here by this time, I think I'm 10, I'm like trying to defend my faith and,
Wow.
and,
Wow.
in front of all these grown ups. And at the end, they wrote a letter, and in the letter it said, she has great citizenship, she has good grades, but because she's refusing to recant her
Decant.
faith,
Yeah,
yeah,
recant. Yeah.
she can't stay at the school anymore. So I just remember walking home with this, letter, completely heartbroken that I couldn't go to school.
Yeah, that was your
And
haven. That was your little haven. That was your part of kind of feeling connected. That and then that's also ripped from under you. Not wow, that is so
yeah.
much. So you're walking home, and then you have this letter, heartbroken, you get home and what happens?
So my mom, like all moms, it's like in the Baha'i faith, education is a law. You're supposed to be educated. So she said, "No problem. Tomorrow we're gonna go and register you at a different school." So she drove me across town, and we went and registered in another school, and I was there for about a week. And then I guess that principal finally got the letter too, and she came, and then same thing. And in the Baha'i faith we are told that truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. So there is this idea that even as a Baha'i child, it never occurred to my mind, I can lie, because it's
Mhm.
just not who Baha'is are, right?
Mhm.
We believe in being truthful. And so I think I was at that second school for about um, a week or so, and then most of my education then happened at home. And then later, after some weeks and some other incidents that happened, we decided to leave Iran. And at that time, Baha'is couldn't just get a passport. If you're a Baha'i, you can't just like leave the country. So the only way to leave the country was to escape, through the mountains, and which was like this really difficult journey. And that took about 5 to 7 days. And then we decided as a family to escape and to go as refugees to Pakistan. So it was my mom, my sister, and I. She was 5 by this time. I'm 10, and I remember we lived in this beautiful home, and I had a room full of toys and full of things that kids have, that things that we are attached to, our artwork and our books and toys and all these things. And my mom said, we are leaving today, and they have told us that we cannot bring anything. We can only bring a backpack with just like a pair of pajamas and just few things. And I just remember her saying we can't even, like, we couldn't even take a toy. So we had this house that we lived in with everything in it, right? You have the beds and the drapes and the toys and everything, the garden. And I just remember walking away from that home with absolutely taking nothing, right? And just like stepping away from everything. And stayed with a family member for a few days, and just, as I said, embarked on this difficult journey of on camelback, leaving the country. And we got to Pakistan, and of course, again, we are Baha'is. We don't have any paperwork. We don't have a passport. We don't have uh, any. You're escaping. You're to some extent illegal immigrants, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
once we got there, we got arrested and were put in prison because they were like, you people try to enter the country, and we kept saying we are Baha'is, and we're trying to get refugee status. And so that was like, again, here you feel like you're fleeing for freedom, and then like you're sitting in a prison cell, you know.
Mhm. How
And
how long was that journey? How long was the journey? Do you
so,
remember how
yeah,
long the
yeah.
journey
So the
was?
journey was about, like, I want to say 6 days,
Wow.
and And
And
it
then
was
in
just
the
a
prison, how long
it
were
was
you in
only a
prison?
day, so we were so
Mhm,
lucky because one of the Baha'is who was in that prison with us was begging one of the guards to allow us to make a phone call, and he kept saying, "You are, illegal. You and tried to enter the country illegally." And we kept saying, "We're Baha'is. We are refugees. We are,
mhm.
And he was just begging them to allow him to make a phone call, and he wouldn't. So this guard would refuse to do that, right? And then at night, the guards changed, and then this guy started doing the same thing, begging the new guard, allow me to make a phone call, and he finally did. And right away, he called the Baha'i Center in Karachi, which is the largest town in Pakistan. And of course, as soon as the Baha'is found out, they went to the United Nations, and they came. And I never forget it because the night that we arrived in Pakistan was Nowruz, which is the Baha'i New Year. And for those of us who come from the Persian background, it's the biggest celebration in Iran as well because it's New Year, right? So it's New Year, and we're sitting in this prison, and it's nighttime, and my mom just like put us in our pajamas, and we're sitting in this like dark room, and it's kind of late, like around 9 o'clock at night or maybe later, and the door opened, and there was this man standing there, and he just said, "Who are the Baha'is?" And we just heard the word Baha'i. We kind of raised our hands, and he said the Baha'i greeting, Allahu Akbar, and he said, Allahu Akbar, let's get out of here. And
Which it means in it's an Arabic, saying, and it means God is the most glorious is what that is saying, but that is how Baha'is greet each other. But
yeah.
just so that, the English speaking speaking population, which I'm English speaking myself, but just so we know what it is. That is amazing. But it's like when you would hear that word of the what is the who are Baha'is, would that little feeling of, like, the knot in your stomach still come to be, like, being that that was the same question when you were, like, in school and the principal coming in and asking, "Who are the Baha'is?" And that being the time that you were then told you couldn't come back to school. When he entered, do you remember there was a little bit of that feeling of the, "Oh my gosh, like, what's gonna happen if we say we are" like, it must have been, like, such a big contrast of suddenly hearing good news, right? Of, like, Allah Pa and, and getting you out of there, like, it that must have been like, I'm just seeing those 2 contrasts of who are the Baha'is from what your teacher's perspective and now sorry, the principal's perspective back in Iran, and now here in the prison in Pakistan, like, it's just such a big contrast.
Yeah, it was like, here we go again. And then, oh, that's a good thing,
Yes. Yes, and,
Yeah.
like and d how did your mom and I wanna hear a little bit more about that about, then your journey, in Pakistan and how your life changed there, but what did your mom do for you and your sister to make this process of all these grieving things and transitions have some kind of I don't know if even the word normalcy or is even valid in this, but what do you remember it being a constant in that whole journey?
From the very beginning, the three of us, my mom, my sister, and I, we were a tight unit, we were always close, of course, when my dad was around as well. But when my dad went to prison and everything, we all just became, I don't know how else to describe it, but our hearts were just cemented together. And my mom, for anyone who knows her, just such a fun person. It's just her personality. She has a great sense of humor, and she's just very lively and very social, and in any setting, I'd like to just share one memory. I remember, like, when my dad was in prison. um, uh, we lived in a house that had like 3 or 4 bedrooms, but during that time we could only afford, warming up one of the rooms, so we all moved into this one room, and the winters in Iran are just like so cold, and lots of snow. And there were other Baha'i children whose parents were in prison, and some of my favorite memories of my childhood is my mom organizing sleepovers where all these other children whose dads were in prison, they would come, and it would be like so many of us, in one room, in a tiny room, all sleeping in the same bed,
I just
watching movies,
oh,
playing
how fun.
games, laughing. And it's just, and then my mom, in the neighborhood that we lived, she was like, in our entire neighborhood, she was the only woman who not only had a driver's license but also had a car. Like, this was like
Mm.
all the
A
kids
big re
in the
This is like a
neighborhood.
big deal. This is a big deal in that time for a woman to have a driver's license in that particular area. Was it just not something that a lot of women had in
Yeah,
terms of their
absolutely.
rights?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
for her to have her own car, it was like a big
Mhm.
deal. Like, I was like the cool kid in the neighborhood, despite the fact that I was a Baha'i. Oh
Mhm.
my gosh, your mom knows how to drive and she has her own car. That's amazing, you know? So during the time my dad was in prison, as I said, there were other families in the same boat as
Mhm.
us, right? And I just remember she had this car, and we would just go and pick up all these kids that go on picnics. I mean, she, again, it's just her personality. She's so social, so happy, so full of love and humor. And some of it sounds strange, but some of my most painful times or when my dad was in prison, but also because of what my mom was able to do for us. Um, it was creating a normal and creating joy
Mhm.
amidst all this. I even remember when we were on this journey to Pakistan, we were like walking, or we were on camelback for like a week, and yeah, nobody has bottles of water.
Mm.
You drank
Mm.
water whenever you saw a river,
Yeah.
and I had this and for some reason, as a 10-year-old, I kept telling my mom, I remember I complained about it once, in the journey, and she knew I loved, at that time as a child, for some reason I loved grape juice. And then she would
Mhm.
make up all these stories. She's like, oh, when we get to Pakistan, they have the best grape juice in the world. And she would like make up all these stories about like all the things that we're gonna do and we're gonna get once we get there. So I don't
That's
know. I
so
felt like I just
beautiful.
like laughing and daydreaming about all these things that is gonna happen once we are in freedom.
That is just so beautiful because, again, she just did the best, and I mean, in that scenario, being here, not only was she a widow, but she was a widow with 2 children, escaping a country on her own with these 2 children under 10 years old, 2 under 2, 2 under 2 under 2, 2 under 10, and, going to a new country and a new experience and still being able to keep that positive outlook, that must have been a really impactful memory, of course, for you, and also a learning to be able to even take on now as your role now as a mom as well. I'm sure that those life experiences have had an impact on how you even choose to parent your kids too in those hard moments. I'm sure you tell them that to look forward to some grape juice.
Yeah.
That there's grape juice, and just wait, there's grape juice on the other in the other country or wherever it is, the little journeys. After this, road trip, we get to some grape juice. So how long were you guys in Pakistan? How long was your family in Pakistan?
So we were there for about 3 years. When you're a refugee, you're kind of waiting for a country to take you in, right?
Mhm.
So we were there for about 3 years, and after that, after 3 years, we ended up in Germany, and but, we moved to Germany, and it's like coming to a new country, and
Again,
yeah.
like, that's like so here you go, not only that, you escape, but then you're going to a country that Pakistan was another language, then there for 3 years. You were able to go to school there when you're in Pakistan?
For
Or
parts of
were
the
you
time,
homeschooled?
yeah. So at
Okay.
that time, for parts of the time, but really not much. And but then, the Baha'i community is often so service oriented and so
Mhm.
organized. And for me, I have moved so much in my time, in my life, but the one constant thing in my life has always been the Baha'i community. You
Mhm.
know, I have to say, whenever we have moved, all you do is, call the Baha'i National Center and you say, I have moved
Here, here,
into this town in the middle of nowhere. Are there any Baha'is? And right, they are like, yeah, there is like five of them or 100 of them. Here is
Mhm.
the number of someone you can call. And I have found that wherever we have moved, we have contacted that person, and right away you have friends and you have kind of
Family. It
a
like a
family.
family. Yeah, family.
Absolutely, and that's how
Yeah.
it was in Pakistan, because it was amazing what the Baha'is in Pakistan did for the Iranian Baha'i refugees. I remember coming to the town of Islamabad, which is the capital city, and they had turned the Baha'i Center into a place where not all, but many Iranian Baha'i refugee families lived, So in every room, you had two or three families living together, and we are living at the Baha'i Center, and and then they have the big room where all the activities are held, and it was you had all these people who had escaped, and some of them were professors and teachers, and one person would be teaching English classes, another person would be teaching chess, somebody else is teaching all sorts of classes. So I felt during the time that I was there, um, my I got an education. It wasn't a formal
Mhm.
education, like in terms of like a school setting, but um, we were busy. We were busy in a good way, and it was, again, thinking of that time, there was a lot of hardship associated with it, but there was also so much love and so much joy
Yes.
associated with that time period, because you're with these people who are all sharing the same experience, and
Mhm.
we're all in this together, waiting for a country to take us in. And there would be like a goodbye party every so often, someone would
For
come
somebody that had left. Oh,
who had to leave, that they had,
uh,
they were going to Ireland or Brazil
oh.
or wherever, they were
That must have
accepted to
been
go.
bittersweet. That must have been bittersweet too, because you were excited for that, for these friends that you had made to now have a home, but it was also probably sad to see some of these friends go too, because if you were that close during those 3 years of of people being here and kind of using each other for support, that must have also been hard, right? Like a little bit like bittersweet.
Yeah, I feel like all my life, what I have found is my life has been a life of detachment,
Yes.
learning to enjoy the moment, but also not being attached to that moment, and knowing that there is always I always look at moving is hard no matter what, you have to start all over again. Sometimes we need to start a new career or a new job, and but at the same time, you meet so many new people that you didn't know before, and they enrich your life, and it creates beautiful experiences. So I feel, how I was sharing, I had to, like, at the age of 10, just like leave this house we lived in with everything in it without taking anything, and learning detachment to material things at such an early age. And I feel after that also learning um, detachment from people, that you cherish those friendships, you cherish those experiences while you're physically with people, in that moment, but also that our lives are not defined by constantly being with the same people,
Well,
and
that is just so powerful what you're saying right now, because especially right now in which as we're recording this, we're still in quarantine throughout the world and due to the pandemic, but that aspect of not being attached to actually being present in actually physical presence with people, because those friendships can also even remain even in the distance. You had to do that every single time you've moved throughout your life, that some of these friendships have continued, just have changed, right? But also some of them have just served their purpose in the moment of time that they were meant to be during the time that you lived in the same place, and maybe you don't continue talking about it, but you're not talking to these people, but you're still grateful for that experience. So that is a huge learning. And being that you were talking about that experience, I'm going back to being again in Pakistan and learning all these things, that it was not formal school, but the lessons that you learned in that environment are like way bigger than anything else we can take in life, of learning how to add or multiply, because they're life they're life lessons of detachment and of looking for joy and heart, looking for the beauty in life and enjoying the moment as it comes as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, we moved to Germany, and again, like it was interesting to come from 3 years of living with so many people, and in like a community setting. And suddenly we moved into this like tiny town in northern Germany, and having, to learn a new language, and all of that, it was hard. But again, yeah, there was a Baha'i community, and you kind of grow through those experiences. And then later on in life, I had the wonderful opportunity to get a student visa and move to the United States to study. And that's where you and I met each other. So,
Yes, we met in college in Los Angeles, yeah.
yeah.
Santa Monica College. Whoop, whoop, whoop.
And then move on to
Other
CSUN, right? So,
universities.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, you said yes. Um, so then in that, so in terms of that, of the moving and the language, like how did you adapt to those parts of learning a language? When you moved to from Pakistan to Germany, from Germany to the States, did you already know English in Germany before you? Because when I met you, you spoke fluent English already. So was it something you learned at school in Germany?
Yeah, so in Germany, I think from elementary school or so, kids learn English, and then I believe once you get to middle school, they also add French to it. So I came, and truthfully, because I was like my sister started first grade, so her process was a little bit easier, to kind of
Absolutely.
learn the language. And whereas like in my case. It was like, oh my gosh, like I had to learn the language and be able to keep up with all these academic, subjects. And so I feel I learned so much of my language from the kids in the neighborhood, just making friends. And so for the longest time, I talked like a teenager, and used the same
The
terminologies.
lingo, the lingo.
Yeah, the lingo. And then like I would
You
have
were
like,
cool. You were
yeah.
cool then.
And then like I would have like older German Baha'is saying, Mona, we don't talk like that, So so they would kind of like say, that's the language people use on the street, not in, So
In
it,
the
it was
formal
like
settings, yeah.
yeah, so it was a process. But yeah, I learned English in at school, and then coming to the States, just again, you just pick it up. You know how it is.
Yes.
You can,
Yes, yes.
we have the same
Well,
experience,
yeah,
so
we came as, in our late teens, but we also like the same. I learned English and, growing up, my dad did speak English, so language was not something I had to learn when I came, but even still, I still have an accent. It doesn't matter how long I've known English, I still have an accent. And but anyway, now you came to the States, you came with a student visa, and then you stayed. You stayed, and then your mom was still in Germany at that time.
yeah, so they were in Germany. And then my grandparents, however, I remember you lived with your grandma, and I lived with my
Yeah.
grandparents when we met. And so my grandparents were in California. And then after a couple of years, they moved also to California. So it was really nice to, to be together. Um, and it was just so wonderful. I can't describe the experience, like being in college here, and suddenly, like, and I had decided to become a teacher. So to study, and it was always emotional because I have family members and friends who are still in Iran, and always thinking, gosh, here I'm in a university setting and I have the freedom to study. And I have the freedom to become a teacher and get a job as a teacher,
Mhm.
often these things that other people might take for granted, for me, I always have this um, idea that, man, this would not be possible if we had stayed in Iran. I wouldn't be allowed to be a teacher. I wouldn't be allowed to go to the university and fulfill my potential. So that just was, it's something that I always think about, and I'm really grateful
That
for.
is that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And in that experience as a teacher now, you've been able to implement all these life learnings in that role now as a educator. Share a little bit about how when we had a little bit of a conversation prior to starting deciding to record this podcast, and I'd love for you to share of what happened in Salt Lake City when you guys lived there in that yeah, in that setting, what we were talking about of the theater teacher and all that kind of stuff. So go ahead, take it on, share that anecdote. I love it.
Yeah, so you knew me. So anyone who knew me before before 2005, 2005 was a significant year for me. But any friend that I ever had, so my whole experience in LA, people who knew me, and in Germany, anytime I would talk about my father and the experience of what happened, I would tell the story. I would share my life story, with friends. However, I couldn't stop like, I would talk about my father's and just tears would come down. Like, I could never, like, mention his name or talk about him without tears just coming down my face. And there were times I would be frustrated about it. I'm like, why can I not control these tears, and I was so proud of him. I was so proud of him giving his life for what he believed in, for him for being steadfast. He could have recanted his faith, and he was steadfast, and he was strong, and he was brave. And I was so proud of him. But at the same time, whenever I would tell others about my experience of losing him, I would get very emotional, and I couldn't control these tears, right? And anybody again who knew me and has heard my story, they will say, yeah, I remember you telling the story to me, and you were very emotional about it. And I think often people don't know what to do when people cry, right? It makes
Mhm,
us feel
mhm.
uncomfortable. You're like, gosh, how do I make
Trying
this
to fix
person
it. Do I fix
laugh?
it? Yeah. How do I fix it? How do I
I
fix it? How do
don't
I
know. Like, do I give this person a hug? Do
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't give them a hug?
yeah.
Do I make them laugh? Or some people want to psychoanalyze you in that moment. Why are you
Mhm,
crying?
mhm,
So it's
mhm,
always awkward, and it was to the point that I didn't want to share my experiences and my losing my father with many people, because I felt that moment would make me emotional, right?
mhm,
So then my husband and I, we moved to Salt Lake, and I started working at a charter school where all the students were on probation. They had committed crimes, and they had gone through the juvenile system, and they couldn't go back to regular schools, and they would be sent to us. And they all had, a probation officer that would show up at the school to do drug tests. And it was like the school of all kinds of kids, from different gangs and addictions and problems, and they each had, gosh, experienced so much in their life. And as it was a small charter school, they had one teacher per subject, and I was the English and German teacher. And we had a teacher for math and science, and one was for art and drama. And this art teacher was always trying to get the students to express themselves, because that's what artists do, right? You can't just do art without some form of expression. And um, and it was just such a tough environment, and the people who were running the schools, they were just like really like tough people. And um, and we would always, all of us, try to find ways of how do we connect to these kids, how can we really gain their trust, because they had been so moved around, from home to home. So many of them came from the foster care, system, where, or many of them were in the foster care system. So how do you establish trust now that they are with us,
Mhm.
and really
Mhm.
make a connection? And it just was tough, like discipline and classroom management in any school setting is hard, but in that particular school, it was just to the next level, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And one of the teachers in the classroom in the school that was teaching the drama classes, she and I, one day were talking, and she was asking me questions about my life, and then she, naturally shared my story of losing my father. And as usual, I'm telling her about my dad, and I just like tears come down. And she was like, Mona, that's it. This is the answer. You need to share your story with our
The kids.
students.
Uh-huh.
We need to share it with the kids. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to cry in front of them. I need to be strong, and they're going to, this is not going to work. I cannot, I know if I tell my story, I'm going to get emotional. And that's the last thing I need, for them to see like a emotional
A
teacher,
teacher, yeah, a teacher, yeah, I get
I'm like,
it.
in this setting, it's not going to work. But she's just such a wonderful and sweet person. And, for about a week or so, she kept encouraging me. She's like, I just think if you open up, they will open up. And it will just, she's this
Mhm.
lovely drama teacher. And she's like, it's going to impact the whole school. And she kept encouraging me. And finally, I gave into it. And we have this big room of all these kids again who have gone through some
A lot.
serious
Mhm,
difficulties,
mhm.
gosh, in their life, and continue to experience them, and come from difficult circumstances, and have broken the law. And and so I joined her class, and I shared my story. And as usual, I'm talking about my dad, and just, I can't control it, just tears come down, right?
Mhm.
And then when I finished the story, something happened that in my life it hadn't happened before. I had shared my story with many people, and 90% of the time, when you hear a story like that, people feel bad for you. They're like, "Gosh, I'm so sorry that happened to you," or there is always sympathy, right?
Mhm,
And or
mhm.
some people, get uncomfortable because you just shared something and you shed some tears, and they don't know how to deal with it. And when I shared the story with this group of students from such tough backgrounds, when it was over, and clearly, I was emotional sharing the story. And these tough, tough kids, they came to me one by one in their own way. And they were just like, gosh, like, Mona, we thought we had it bad. This is like
Mhm.
amazing. And you're so strong, and you're so brave. And I can't believe you went through that. And you turned out normal. And, in their own words, and they're like, and you have a car, and you are a teacher. And I had like a beat up Toyota Corolla, and I was teaching at this school, but to them, I had accomplished something in life despite the
Uh,
experiences.
you gave them hope. You gave them hope of what was possible, right? Do you
Yeah,
think
but
that that's what it was? Like, the perspective of them, like, "Wow, if somebody that's gone through such hardship could go through that and still have a beat up Toyota car at the end and be a professor, wow, I have a chance to also be sorry, and be, be a teacher. I have a chance to also turning my life around and making this hardship into something new." Do you not think that that was something that they felt was a little bit of that hope?
I think so. But what was also what they did for me, I had never, up to that point in my life, I had never associated my experience with strength or with bravery. And it was always like, oh, you poor thing. Not,
Oh,
I
with
didn't look
pity,
at
pity.
myself. Yeah, most
People will
people
look at it
that
with
I had
pity
shared it
instead.
with was a sense of
Interesting.
pity. Yeah. Whereas like with
Mhm.
these kids, they looked at it and they were like, wow, like Hearn, you're strong and you're amazing. And then something very beautiful happened, and that was during lunch hours and during after school and between classes, because I became so vulnerable and I had, shared my story
Mhm.
with them. These kids, one by one, they came and they just totally opened up and shared their experiences with me, and it was just this beautiful exchange. And I cannot tell you how it impacted the dynamics of the school. And they opened up even to each other, and suddenly you saw kids who come from different gangs and backgrounds. They're suddenly getting along, and they see each other's humanity. And it was powerful to see that for the first time, for me to say, oh my gosh, this experience was not just something that happened to me and I overcame it, but it had a bigger impact by
Mhm.
sharing it, by sharing my story and opening up my heart and being vulnerable. It allowed these kids to be vulnerable, and it just like cemented that connection. And it was to the point, because we would always get new students, who would be bringing from the detention center. They would be they would come to the school, and the moment they would walk in, so many of these kids would be so protective of me. They would go and grab the kid and they're like, you better not mess up in her classroom. You better be respectful to her. And it was just like,
They
really,
had your back. Yeah, they
yeah,
had your
yeah,
back.
it was just because, we had that connection. And this particular teacher who really opened the way was so sweet. She said, you know what? I see the impact your story had on the students of this school. Could you share it at my children's school? They go to a regular public school, in a middle class neighborhood. If I arrange it, could you share it? And I was like, oh my gosh, here we go again.
Mhm.
I don't know. I feel comfortable with these kids now. And she kind of went ahead and arranged it. And I had the opportunity to go to this big, high school and share my story. And after that, I had, gosh, so many of the students, staying behind and asking questions and opening, themselves up about what they had experienced. And then something very unique happened. The principal of that school went and told other principals that, we just had this speaker and the kids responded so well to this. And that just opened up this opportunity. And I did since 2005. I have been invited to so many school assemblies, with 400, 500, sometimes, the hundreds and hundreds of students that come to these school assemblies to hear my story. And more I started sharing my story, more I started opening myself up. It became amazing because it had this healing power on me,
Mm.
that
Mhm.
every time I would tell the story and I would talk about my dad and how amazing he was and what he went through, every time I would get less emotional. And now I'm at a point where I love him and I miss him so much, but I can share his story over and over and over again without shedding even one tear,
Mhm.
So it was the experience of continuing. It's something that I do, continuing to going and speaking at these school assemblies really helped the healing process, to seeing, wow, here, this experience happened to me and it has this impact. And every school that I go to, I at least have like, so many students staying after to just talk to me. And oftentimes principals are like, it's okay if you miss part of your next class. It's okay. If you
'Cause they
miss
see
next
the
period.
importance.
Yeah,
Yeah, they see the importance of it. Yeah.
because they come and they all want to be heard. And it's usually the kids who stay behind are the ones who also have lost someone in their life. And I have so many kids that I've had, they're like, gosh, my father was in prison too, and my father was innocent, he hadn't committed any crimes in his life, and was innocent because he was a Baha'i, he was in prison. And some of their family members who are in prison, they had committed crimes, but that doesn't matter because the experience of losing a brother or a father or a mother who is incarcerated is the same,
Mhm. It is,
for
yeah.
the child who is going through that process. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter whether they're guilty or not, you know.
Right, right. The
So
child still can't see that parent, and they're still living without that parent in their life. So regardless of the reason that they're in prison, that yeah, so they can relate to that.
absolutely. And so it just became this amazing opportunity where, like, I've had entire districts, calling me, and I would just go from school to school and share the story and staying behind and having these conversations. And what I have found is that so many children and so many young people in general really yearn to talk to people who are older than them, such as myself or others, about their experiences with death, because it's in most in our culture we tend to avoid talking about things that upset us, and death is upsetting
Mhm.
to a lot of people, so it's somewhat of a taboo culture, right?
Mm,
And a
yeah.
lot of these kids that they carry all of that pain and struggle in their hearts, and they don't want to upset the mom or the dad or whoever is left behind by talking about it, and we want to push things under the rug. And for a lot of the what was interesting to me from going to these school assemblies, a lot of the kids that I have conversations with who are in junior high and high school, their biggest challenge was that when the whether it's their father or mother or close family member, when they passed away, how it changed the dynamic of their family and their family structure, where they suddenly had to grow up, and get a second job and help out with their siblings, and all of those pressures that we don't tend to talk about when we talk about death, so it really has created an opportunity to, in a very honest and truthful way, having conversations about this issue with young people.
Everything you said is the reason that I am so passionate about talking about this subject, and the reason I created this platform as of a podcast is exactly because of what you said. Not only just the topic of death, but just in general grief, and what you just said about all the dynamics that change in a family anytime that somebody's not there, whether it is for divorce, or as you said, somebody in prison, or if a child, or if you move to another country, another city, all these changes. Sorry, it's thunder in Texas. I'm like, if you hear, it's a thunder in the background. Um, so it is so important to have these type of conversations, like you said, and to make it normal to be able to talk about it, because change is part of life, death is part of life, and if we don't talk about it, and if we don't talk about our fears around it, or anything regarding that, then we're suppressing all these emotions that could create worse effects in our life than if we just express it and just talk about it. So um thank you. And for the fact that you were able to shift in that 2005, all because of this art teacher wanting you to share your story to get her students motivated, and how that one little thing became this ripple effect of change in not only that community, but all the other cities that you've lived there from, because you've moved quite a bit even after that, after Salt Lake City. So you've moved to other cities and created this ripple effect in all these communities. And that kind of shows the beauty again about how something that happened to you at such a young age that was so horrible can bring all these beautiful gifts at the same time, of gifts to these communities and to these young children and adults too, because you also talk in a university level as well sometimes? Do you give talks at university levels as well?
Yeah, to Rotary clubs, to you know, to
Everything,
a
yeah.
variety, a variety of settings, and I'm always, um, I remember a refugee friend asked me. She said, you always, she's like most refugees. She's like, I always see you talking about your experiences of losing your
Mhm.
father and becoming a refugee, and most refugees just want to forget that part of their life. They just want to
Mm.
move on. And she was like, why do you keep doing this? Why do you want to relive it? As if reliving something, people want to save themselves from reliving that
Mm.
experience, right? And for me, this has again been so part of the healing process of sharing the story and learning from everyone else who stays behind. And one thing that I have found as a parent, we want our children to be resilient, right? We want them to be strong. And oftentimes we live in a culture where we do everything for our kids. It's just the way things are. We drive them to their games, and they don't have to walk to anything,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
we prepare their food. And it's like, how do you, in this culture of comfort, how do you raise resilient kids? And I have found so many of the principals have shared with me that afterwards, when they reflect with the students and the teachers of what was important about them to hear the story or having me come, they often say that the kids felt for the first time that you could go through really hard times and still survive and still be okay. So I feel it's important for us to expose our children to people who have experienced hardships in their life, whatever that hardship is, because then they can see examples of people who have gone through really difficult times and they have been able to overcome it. And if someone else can do it, we can do it too. And for my own kids, obviously I come from like a Baha'i background, but I think I love, I know it sounds strange, but I love talking with my children about life after death, I feel to the best of my ability, I try to give them this. I don't want them to ever be scared or fearful of a family member passing away, and for them to look at, we often give this analogy of, in the Baha'i writings, it says that the world that we live in is like a cage, right? And the bird is our soul, and that the true life of the soul is in the next world when we pass. And so, to some extent, we are in this beautiful golden cage, and as beautiful as it is,
It's just
the bird
temporary.
is
It's
going to be
just
much
temporary.
happier,
Mhm.
when it can
If it's
fly.
free.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's free from all the challenges of this world. And so, as sad as we are, that it's okay to miss people, because we miss them and we miss their having their physical presence here. But also there is that balance. We miss them, but also we are happy for them because they're relieved of the pain and the struggles that they had in this world. And I often I know I shared this with you, with my kids, when they go to school or they have to go on a field trip, or there is certain places I can't be with them, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes I get emotional because as parents we want to protect our kids, and we want to be with them all the time and to protect them from bullies or from whatever challenges they might be experiencing. And but there is in life, there is situations where you can't be there, and those are the moments where I have like really sweet, honest conversations with my dad who has passed away. It's like, listen, I can't be there, but I don't know what you're doing, but I need you to be there with my
But
kids
drop
in that
everything,
moment.
dad, just drop everything and go and be with my kids right now.
Exactly. It's like, and I just think it's important to tell the kids that, to talk about grief and really make them feel comfortable that everyone processes grief in a different way, and it's okay. And And that I love in the Baha'i writings, Abdul Baha said that tears are the pearls of the heart, you know, and
Oh, that's
for
such a
the
beautiful vision. I had never heard that quote. I shared the one of the cage in my first episode ever of the that I created, but I had never. Can you say that again? That
Abdul Baha says tears are the pearls of the heart.
mm,
And I for the longest time I would always be mad at myself. Oh gosh, why can I not share my my the story of my dad without crying. And I remember this very sweet Baha'i in Salt Lake City. She said, Mona, it's okay to cry, because they're the pearls of the heart. They kind of tell the story that sometimes our words fail us to share those
yes,
stories, but our tears are there too, um,
to express.
to express that. Yeah, they express the
Yes.
love that we feel for our loved ones.
Wow, Mona, I've just taken so many pieces of what you've said, and especially being a mom of of all of these little nuggets of inspiration, of guidance, of how to be able to have these conversations with my kids. And even though I have them often, just even the fact of actually asking my loved I had never done that. I've never asked my mom or my sister to go and be with them during certain times. And I'm gonna take that one. I'm gonna make sure to use that one whenever I can't be present for them either. But I appreciate it so much. And the amount of gifts you've been able to give back, all because you were able to also be vulnerable with your story in your journey, and that is just a life lesson for all of us to be able to take on, that our stories are really just something that somebody else can learn from as well. So thank you again for sharing, and I can't wait to re-listen to this. It's amazing. Thank you, Mona.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Kendra, and for doing this podcast, because I feel more we talk about these issues and about death in general, it will open people's heart and help, heal their pain in the process.
Absolutely. That is exactly why I created it. If any, and again, you don't have to believe everything we've said in terms of your own religious backgrounds, but if any little bits of this just brings some kind of solace to your own heart and your own journey and your own grief process, take it. That's what I say. It's like if you don't have the tools, just borrow somebody else's tools that have helped them go through these hardships or and moments in their life, and just borrow them until you have some that work for you. So thank you again, Mona.
Thank you.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.